I'm new to Reddit, and I decided to share this after my husband encouraged me. I've been in therapy since this happened. I sleep with a gun next to my bed now, and the light's on, and I can't be home alone. This is what happened to me on May 23, 2017. In my neighborhood, we had a few burglaries. I work from home, and I'm usually home alone with my son. We live near a busy mall, and our neighborhood, even though it's a pretty good area, is close to highways and has 3 ungated entrances, so it makes it easy for people to break in, steal, and get out before police can come. I scare pretty easily, so hearing an alarm go off nearby, seeing the police helicopter circle above, and having the neighborhood swarming with cop cars always freaks me out. We had a spree of guys going into unlocked cars and stealing stuff. I mention this because there were 24 cars they were able to get into. Our area is the kind where you can leave your door open and usually nothing bad happens. At this point, it's just been petty theft. Nothing major has been stolen, and no one's been hurt. So for the next few months, everyone is pissed. We all feel really violated by what's been happening. Homeowners meetings are packed, and everyone wants to put a stop to crime going on in our neighborhood. It soon revealed our rental property in the hood was the home to a drug dealer who was dealing more than just weed. He was selling hardcore stuff, and it was thought that a lot of the crimes stemmed from that house. They had undercover cop cars throughout the neighborhood, just waiting to make a bust. Up until this point, it had been pretty scary, but from a far-away viewpoint. Also at this point, no one was getting hurt, at least not physically yet. Our neighborhood watch sent information to make sure alarms are on, windows and doors are locked, and if a car is in the driveway, more than likely burglars will skip your home. Just lock your car doors. Since I work from home, my car is always in the driveway. One afternoon in April, my son and I were on a walk. It was a nice day, and about 2 blocks from our house, the cop cars came rushing in. I was told to get back to my house as soon as possible. An officer actually escorts us to our door and lets me know to lock all my doors. There are 3 armed assailants on the run between my street and the next. They broke into 2 houses. In one, a woman was home alone and the 3 men raped her, tied her up and left her. They broke into a second home and pistol whipped a man that was home. The next week, a woman was nearly kidnapped on a 6 a.m. run on my street. And the fear was real at this point. Going out alone during the day or night wasn't happening. None of these criminals were caught. But then things died down. Usually every couple days there was a break-in, but there was nothing after this in early April. In late May, I had to take my car into the dealership for some work. I was left without a car for 2 days. To keep my son busy, we would go on long walks to the mall with 2 other moms and kids in the morning, and then go swimming in our pool in the afternoon. A lot of the stay-at-homes grouped together because of fear of the recent things going on. This day it was actually pretty nice out, so I had all of our sliding glass doors open and I was letting the house air out. While I was bathing my son, I got a funny feeling, so I rushed back in and locked all the doors and blinds as quickly as possible. Even though it's in our backyard, I didn't feel safe leaving them open, with me down the hall in the bathroom. Just as I was walking away from the last door, I see 2 large men entering our backyard on our security camera in the kitchen. We have 3 stations in our house where you can see the feed from the cameras inside and outside. We have one in our bedroom, one in the office, and one in the kitchen. My husband does security systems, so he set us up with the most elaborate and expensive unit. We have 2 padlocks on the gate, so I was pretty freaked out that they were able to get in. These men are big guys, at least 6 feet and around 220 pounds, give or take. I'm 5'3" and only 140. I'm not a tiny girl, but I would be no match for these guys. The guys are trying to look through the windows, so I edge back into the bathroom and realize that I left my cell phone outside by the pool. I can't call anyone or get attention from anyone outside of my house. All I have is my work phone in the office, and that needs to be booted up to be used. I was on vacation for the week, so the system was shut down for the entire time. I grab my son, his diaper bag, and we make our way into my office. The room is pretty soundproof. You have to be screaming for it to be heard outside, and it has access to the security cameras and where you can actually hear audio from the cameras. It also has a heavy-duty lock on the door. My husband set it up after the rape so that it could be a panic room if we ever needed it. It's hidden in our garage, and unless you turn on all the lights in there, and you have to walk around this big tool bench and a high shelf, if you're not looking, you may not even realize there's another room. My son thankfully falls asleep on the rug. As I'm freaking out watching these guys, they use a little hammer to break the sliding glass door to enter my bedroom. I'm getting the computer started up to call the police. Once they're inside, though, I'm only able to see them in the living room, kitchen, and my son's room. They're going into all 5 bedrooms of my house, rummaging through closets and drawers. The larger of the 2 men walks into the living room. He has my cell phone in his hand, and he literally looks up at the camera in the living room and waves my cell phone in his hand. He opens up his bag, pulls out a knife, rope, and duct tape, and what I later found out was condoms. He then says, "Hey, pretty mommy, where are you hiding? We just want to have some fun with you." I realize these guys aren't here to steal stuff. I finally am able to call the cops. They tell me to stay secured in the room, turn out the lights, stay on the line, and be as quiet as possible. These guys are tearing my house apart, and they're calling my name looking for me. They even start calling my son's name. This part freaks me out, because how the fuck did they know our names? One of the assholes actually started eating the chicken I baked for dinner. They're rummaging through my laundry room, and one of them grabs a pair of dirty underwear and inhales deeply. It's the most disgusting thing I've ever witnessed, and I was praying they didn't find us. They make their way into the garage and they're looking around. I can only see them a little from the kitchen camera. I'm praying they don't turn on the lights to see the entrance to the office in the corner of the garage, and I'm whispering into the phone, keeping the dispatcher up to date on what I'm seeing on our security feed. She tells me the cops are about 4 minutes out. The assholes are rummaging through the garage. I hear them playing with my husband's power tools. My son wakes up and surprisingly doesn't start crying. He quietly looks at me, sucking his thumb. I know what these jackasses have in mind for me, but I'm so scared to think what they're gonna do to my son. That single thought brings me to tears even as I recount the situation to tell it. I bring my son into the closet of the room with a flashlight, bottle, and blanket, and I mouth for him to be quiet and shut the door. The dispatcher tells me the cops are 3 minutes away. Her name is Janice, and I beg her to tell them to hurry up. She tells me to keep calm and that she's there with me. She recommends that I get in the closet as well. I don't though, because I don't want them to think about my son if they break through the door. Then the guys start pounding on the office door. These guys are pulling at the door and it sounds like they're throwing their full weight into it. I hear my husband's power saw. At this point, the bigger guy screams, "Bitch, I know you and the baby are in there. We're here to fuck you up. You should have just come out when we came in." I'm literally shaking and praying the door and lock holds up. I move a dresser in front of the door. No idea why I did that, but it's what they do in the movies. I then push the futon in the room against the dresser, just praying the weight on the door would keep them out. I tell the dispatcher what's going on, and she tells me the cops are breaking through my front picture window. I look at the security system, and sure enough there looks to be 4 or 5 cops at my door. The rest was a blur, and it felt like it was forever with all the noises of taking the guys down and then just silence. I was sobbing and rocking hard in the dark with my son in my arms, who sat there quietly hugging me and patting my back. Soon I heard a knock at the door, and it was a female officer. It took me a moment to open the door, and I didn't even realize I still had Janice on the phone. The guys were arrested. They were caught with a large amount of cocaine, meth, and roofies on them. They had broken into the drug dealer's house before they broke into my house. The cops later disclosed they had been stalking and watching me for a few weeks. They knew I was home all along, and I was the next victim on their list. I thank God they didn't get to me, because I have no idea if I would still be here to tell this story. We actually were able to sell our house 2 months ago, and I moved out of state. Our new hood has a gated entrance. My house has security cameras in every room, and I have a gate around the entire property. To the rapists and burglars terrorizing my old neighborhood, let's never meet again. This particular event happened almost a year ago, sometime in mid-October. A couple friends and I drove out to visit an old friend of ours from high school, George, who now lived about an hour out of the city. We spent the whole day with him, and it was really late when we decided to finally start the drive back home. My friend Lisa was passed out in the passenger seat. She had had quite a few drinks and decided to spend the ride home asleep. My other friend Sam was sitting in the back seat behind Lisa and was playing a game on her smartphone. I, of course, was driving. I was following the GPS's instructions back to the freeway. At that moment, we were driving down a dark street with thick trees bordering both sides. Everything was pretty peaceful, with the only sounds I could hear being that of the car moving along the road and the radio on low volume. Suddenly, my car let out a loud jolt, and I felt as if I had hit something. Sam let out a shocked scream while Lisa remained dead asleep. I slammed on the brakes and the car came to a halt. I was breathing heavily when I asked what the hell had just happened. Sam peered through the back window and gasped. She turned to me with an angry look on her face and shouted that I had just hit a dog. I looked through the back window, and sure enough, a dog was lying in the road a few yards behind the car. Sam is a pretty big animal lover, so I wasn't surprised to see her get pissed at me. She was about to open her door and rush to the animal's aid when I stopped her. Once I had gotten over the shock of running over a dog, the feeling in my gut told me that something was off. I'm no braggart, but I consider myself to be a very attentive and safe driver. My eyes were on the road at all times, and I distinctly remember not seeing any dog in the road prior to the car jolting. Yes, it was dark, but I was sure that I would have at least seen the dog in the headlights before hitting it. I looked through the back window and took a closer look at the dog, or at least as much as I could make out in the reddish light coming from my taillights. It was a fairly big dog, at least a golden retriever or something like that. One particular detail caught my attention. I could see the dog's tail wagging. Now, I'm no expert in the mannerisms of animals, but I was sure the last thing a dog would do after being hit by a car would be to wag its tail. After a moment of thought, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and sped off. Sam snapped at me and ordered me to go back, but I told her that something was wrong with this whole situation. She continued to argue, but she fell silent as she turned back towards the back window. I heard her ask, "What the heck?" with a shaken voice. I looked in the rearview mirror. Though it was dark, I was able to make out the silhouettes of 3 large figures emerging from the trees on the side of the road. The dog was now up on its feet and jumping around happily. The 3 figures looked in our direction as I pressed my foot down on the gas harder and sped off. Sam and I remained silent for the rest of the ride home. It wasn't until a few days later that we told Lisa about it. We've been back to visit George a few times since then, but we always make sure to leave before sunset. Still, I dread to think about what would have happened if we had gotten out of the car. When I was a teenager, I was a goth. Black hair, black clothes, black makeup, even had a pair of combat boots. My friends and I, in typical goth fashion, hung out at the local cemetery. We started going as a joke, but soon discovered we liked the peace we found there. That all changed one night. My friend had called to see if I wanted to hang out, and I did. None of our other friends were available. They were either working or recovering from partying the night before, so we were on our own. My friend picked me up, and we drove up to the cemetery. We were hanging out, smoking cigs and BSing about the latest issue she was having with her boyfriend, when we noticed that at the top of the hill we were on, 100 feet away, a bonfire had been lit. You have to understand that this cemetery is about a block off campus of a major university, and it's not uncommon for college students to go there and party. My friend and I sighed, knowing that we would have to get going soon. It was illegal to be in the cemetery after dark, and we knew the police would show up because some jerks had decided they needed a bonfire. We decided to finish our cigs and then take off. Just then, the most horrible stench came wafting down the hill from the direction of the bonfire. My friend gagged and covered her mouth. I groaned and said, "What the hell?" My friend shook her head and said, "I don't know what they're doing. Let's just leave." We get in the car, and one of us suggested, I honestly don't remember who, that maybe we should just go up and see what they were doing. My stomach churned, and a cold shiver went through my body. My friend must have had the same feeling, because at the same time we both said, "No, we should leave." My friend turned the car on, switched on her headlights, put the car in reverse, and looked over her shoulder before starting to back up. I was looking up at the hill. A figure stepped in front of the bonfire. I could only see a silhouette, but I was sure that whoever it was watching us. A feeling of terror hit me, and I yelled at her to go, getting louder and even more panicked with each word. My friend looked back up the hill for a second, and just as the figure took a step towards us, she stepped on the gas and peeled out, going in reverse down the hill. She rammed the gear shift into drive, and we were out. We didn't say anything for a while until she asked, "What the hell were they burning?" I shook my head. She dropped me off at home, and I tried to go to bed. The next morning I woke up and went out to the kitchen. Mom was there drinking her morning coffee, and I joined her. We talked about her job for a bit, when she suddenly comes out with, "Did you hear what happened last night?" I shrug and say no. I had just gotten up. She tells me that a woman she worked with was kidnapped from the parking garage. "Oh my God," I say. "Did they find her?" "Yes, but too late," she replies. "Whoever took her had raped and murdered her. They found her this morning up in the cemetery. He tried to dispose of her body in a bonfire." I froze. My brain was going a mile a minute, with the realization slowly creeping up. She was what that smell was. Needless to say, I never hung out at the cemetery at night again. I think back to our decision to leave instead of investigating the fire. That one decision could have changed everything. I had mostly forgotten about this story until someone linked me to this subreddit. After thoroughly creeping myself out for a few days, I decided I should contribute as well. For many years, I spent my summers working in a major southern US city with a moderately high crime rate and some serious racial conflict. Now, I grew up in New York City and live there to this day, and am not overly afraid of walking around some of my city's more infamous areas at night, but I think it's important to respect the city you're in, and I knew that this southern city was quite a bit more dangerous for me to walk around alone in, especially as a young petite woman. 5 foot, 105 pounds. I'm pretty strong, a lot stronger than people think by looking at me, but I know better than to think I would do well in a one-on-one fight. To be honest, in my summer city I wouldn't usually even walk home alone after work, since I worked until 10 p.m. or later, even though it was only a 10-minute walk away. It seemed silly to ask someone for a ride when it was a lovely and short walk through a gorgeous city, but I also knew that I didn't feel safe. It wasn't even the caution I've sometimes felt in a crummy neighborhood back home, but just a totally different feeling. The complete inability to feel confidently safe. I loved my summers there, but I avoided being alone after dark at all costs. But as often happens, we make little compromises. It was midnight, and the only other person in the office was staying for another couple of hours while one of the events we were managing wound down. He asked if I wanted him to drive me home, but I knew that this would mean locking the entire building up, driving like 2 minutes, then 2 minutes back, and then disarming the security system again, etc. And I just felt silly, like a scared little girl. So I said, "No, I'll be okay. I only live a few blocks away," and I went on my merry way. I walked with my head up, my stride sure, my ears open just like I do back home. I got 1 block, and then another. It was a gorgeous night, and I let myself enjoy it and relax a bit, as I hoped in vain for a gentle breeze to cool me off a little, and enjoy the symphony of the various insects that came out at night. It was ungodly humid, and I didn't see a single other person. Definitely a different type of city than New York City, but I could hear the gentle hum of nightlife from the main drag one avenue over. I got a third block, and then I saw another person. A man. Of course, I thought to myself as my anxiety ratcheted up, and I instantly admonished myself for my bias. I was out walking alone at night, after all. Why didn't a man have the same right? But, and this has never happened to me before or since, something about the sight of that man, that specific man, terrified me. I couldn't tell you why. He was in his mid-20s and had long shaggy hair. As the moonlight reflected off of him, I could see it was blonde. Everything about him struck me as just sort of an anomaly. I don't mean to make such judgments, but at that time of night, most of the white people are in bed, or in groups heading to or from the bar together. Of course, then again, I'm white too, so... He looked like a surfer, not a stalker. He actually looked pretty cute, and yet I could hardly bear to look at him, because looking at him filled me with fear and apprehension. I know that you can never really tell, but it really just struck me. How much this guy did not look like the sort of guy who would terrify me, and yet how absolutely terrified he made me feel for reasons I couldn't articulate. There was nothing objectively scary about him, and yet I just felt this sickening dread as we slowly approached each other. It wasn't just that I was alone at night, but I knew that he scared me. He was walking towards me, and I had to walk towards him to get home. We got closer, and he got bigger and bigger as I approached, and I felt smaller and smaller as I approached him. Maybe a minute passed, and soon we were on the same block. I willed myself to just get past him and get it over with, and yet when I was about 20 feet away from him, I stopped. I don't know why. I just really felt like I shouldn't walk past him. It almost felt like I couldn't make myself go any closer. This is ridiculous, I thought to myself, and I even began to blush in the dark summer night, embarrassed by my behavior. But just to ease my mind, I crossed the street feeling foolish. And then he crossed the street too. "Don't come any closer to me," I said loudly without even meaning to. It just came out of me. It surprised me how complete it was, how it was exactly what I felt and exactly what I wanted most in the world at that moment translated into words. Don't come any closer. How it was a command, not a request. I had never heard myself sound so sure of anything before in my life. My voice was the first real sound I'd heard in several minutes, and I was surprised at how loud it was, breaking the tension and finally starting this, whatever this was. He looked like it startled him, too. "Don't be scared," he said after a moment, though he did stop walking towards me. "I'm not scared," I said. "I just don't want you near me." We stood there for a moment at an impasse, looking at each other. "Please," he said. "I just got mugged. Someone stole my wallet and my phone. I don't have any money and I need to call someone to get home." "There's a gas station one block over on the avenue right there," I pointed to the right of us. "They have a phone." "Look, I'm not from here and I had too much to drink, and I don't want to get lost," he said. I surprised myself with all the red flags I noticed as soon as they went up. His clear and sober-sounding speech, his local-sounding accent, the fact that I was the first to speak, the one to initiate the dialogue, when if he was the one who needed help, you'd think he would have said something first. And the weirdness of someone going out alone and getting drunk on their own in a strange city, instead of hanging out with friends or drinking moderately or anything like that. I know it's not impossible. I've traveled alone myself and enjoyed my own company in plenty of bars, but it all just seemed like a bunch of relatively less than common stuff, and taken all together, it made me suspicious. He continued, "Will you walk to the gas station with me, or can I borrow your phone?" "No," I said. "You should turn right and walk until you come to the next intersection. You'll be at a very busy road with a gas station on your left-hand side." "Please help me," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you, I just need help." He started walking again, towards me, slow, like how you approach a cat. "Seriously, what's wrong with you? I just need help." I thought of my Leatherman and my flick knife, both of which I use regularly for work, both of which were buried somewhere in the bottom of my hellishly messy purse. My fingers twitched with longing, but I didn't want to be distracted, so I didn't start fumbling around for them. "I told you," I said, raising my voice. "Don't come any closer to me." I stepped backwards and hated myself for doing it. It felt like a sort of mini-surrender. He took another step forwards. "I won't hurt you," he said. I began crossing the empty street again, walking backwards at first just to keep my eyes on him, and I said, "I'll scream. There's a cop who's sanctioned on a bike 4 blocks away. He's there every night and he'll hear me scream. He'll be there in seconds. You really should turn right at this corner. It'll just take you to the gas station." "If you say so," he said, and I felt the distinct and chilling question within myself of whether in his ambiguity he was referring to the location of the gas station or the location of the police officer. He didn't start walking. I stood there on the other side of the street, wary of taking my eyes off him. But he still didn't walk. So I did. I walked until we were directly across the street from each other, and then I walked further. I glanced at him over my shoulder, and after a few steps he was still there watching me, going nowhere, just staring at me. I walked a few more steps and glanced over my shoulder at him again. He was still standing there. I picked up the pace and went a few ways further, looked back, and he was gone. Completely gone. He had to have moved quickly, a lot quicker than he'd been moving before when he was walking towards me, to reach that intersection and turn right towards the gas station in just those few steps. I couldn't stop wondering, where else could he have gone, moving that quickly, without me watching? I didn't think he could have crossed the whole street and managed to hide somewhere, at least not without me hearing. I glanced at the sidewalk across from me. It was lined with trees and bushes. There were massive gardens all along it, all kinds of yards and stuff like that. There were almost no streetlights and so many shadows. He could be anywhere. I thought about turning down a side street and heading towards the main drag where all the bars and restaurants were. I glanced down one as I passed. No streetlights at all, just sleepy, silent buildings all empty for the night, and the bright lights of the next avenue seemed impossibly far away. I kept going straight, and I tried to tell myself to calm the fuck down. He was just someone walking alone like I was, nothing more. I even managed to work up some guilt over not doing more to help him. I like to think of myself as a good person, and it bothered me that I had been so rude to someone who really might have needed help. But at the time, I just couldn't quite make myself relax about it. I wanted to run, but I desperately didn't want to run as well. Maybe it's just a leftover superstition from childhood, but somehow I always felt that a chase never truly begins until you start running. So I walked. Quickly. I looked back and I saw shadows. A lot of them. I walked quicker, and I looked back again. Still nothing but shadows. I willed myself to calm down, but I couldn't make it happen. Finally, I approached the block where the cop on the bicycle was always waiting behind a few trees. With that grove in sight, I broke into a run. The chase was finally on, if it would ever be. I sprinted, and then as my panic grew, I pushed even faster down that last block. The cop heard me running his way before he really saw me. "Are you okay, miss?" he asked as I approached him, still largely shrouded by the shadows of the trees around him, straddling his bike and peering out at me. "Yes," I replied, feeling silly immediately. "I'm fine. Sorry, I just got scared." I smiled in an apology and began to make fun of myself, the way we so often do when we feel stupid. But the cop was already looking behind me over my shoulder. Sir?" he called, loudly, finally coming out of the shadows so he could fully be seen. "Can I help you with anything?" "No thanks," I heard a voice say. I turned around and there was the man, maybe 30 feet behind me, just staring at me. I can only think that he followed me after all, slinking along in the shadows. That he walked when I walked, and eventually he started running when I ran to keep up, even though full-on running meant abandoning his cover. "Do you know him?" the cop asked. "No," I said quietly. He told me he got mugged and he wanted me to help him, but I was so scared, so I didn't. I didn't help him. Even in that moment, I felt a twinge of guilt. I waited for the man to come closer, to tell the cop that he had been mugged, that he needed a phone and that he needed help, to prove that I was the horrible person in this situation, not him. He said nothing. He waved and then turned around and started walking the other way. He never looked back. I waited with the police officer as we watched him walk for several minutes, and then I asked the cop to escort me to my home a block away. When we got to my front door, the cop asked me if I was okay, or if I wanted to make a formal statement. I couldn't even really think of what I would even say. I was out walking alone, and I saw another person out walking alone, and I just yelled at him when he asked me for help. And then he followed me, and all I really know is that he was blonde. I was a bit shocked and stunned, so I said no and thanked him for helping me get home safely. I went inside and used my flashlight to get to bed, too scared to turn on the lights for fear that they would render me visible from the street. It wasn't until I was already laying down, sweltering in my unair-conditioned bedroom because I couldn't bear to open the windows, that I found myself wondering. If I hadn't run, if he hadn't been forced to run, and thus abandoned the silent but uneven cover of the shadows and trees, would the officer have even seen him at all? Or would he have remained hidden, watching me and following me right up to my very doorstep, lurking in my own bushes as I climbed the stairs to the porch and fought to get the key in the lock? Would I have waved the cop bravely, speed-walking on my way home, willing myself not to run, with that man slithering behind me the whole time, unseen by either of us? And if so, what then?